Welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Curtis, and today we have Tommy Baxter from Brentwood Country Club joining me today after some technical issues, but we got it all figured out here. Tommy, thanks for being with me here. I really appreciate it. Tell us a little bit more about your background, what brought you to Brentwood Country Club, and kind of how you got there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Doc. I
Of course.
appreciate it. I grew up in South Carolina, started playing golf at the age of 12, knew at the age of 15 that this was something that I wanted to do for a living. And I was a pretty good junior golfer growing up, but I was never really good enough to go play at a college that I really wanted to go to. So I decided to do the fast track into the golf business and attended the Golf Academy of America in Orlando, Florida, where I graduated when I was 19 and been in the business ever since. Had a great opportunity with my wife to move to Nashville. I was able to work at the Kiowa Island Club, all in South Carolina, and then when we came to Nashville, I started working at a place called Foxland Harbor. Worked there for about 2 years, and then had the opportunity to go down to Brentwood Country Club and work under Johnny Bridgman, where I ultimately became his successor as the head pro.
Very cool. Was it the Golf Academy of America? Is that switch?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. What is that process?
So it's basically like a trade school.
Yeah.
It's something that unfortunately doesn't even exist anymore. But it was college for golf nerds like me. There was no biology, math, science classes. It was history of golf, rules of golf, club making, teaching,
Wow.
attitude and motivation, all of the things. Everything was geared towards golf and the golf business. So me being a golf nerd, like I said, it was perfect for me.
Yeah, that kind of sounds amazing. I imagine there's some members at the club that would kind of do that as a hobby. They take that as a online course if they could buy it. I know I'm interested in it. Kind of sounds amazing. Cool. So after
Yeah, it
that,
was awesome.
no doubt, the you after that you worked in South Carolina, that club. What was the name of that club again?
The Kiowa Island Club.
Kiowa Island Club. What was that experience like?
hmm It was great. So Kiowa Island is well known throughout the entire world for world class golf. The Ocean Course is one that hosted the Ryder Cup back in 1991, has hosted two PGA championships just in the past 15 years. The most recent one was where Phil Mickelson set the record for being the oldest champion ever. I think he was 50 or 51 at the time.
I see.
So they have seven golf courses on the island. Five of them are part of the Kiowa Island Resort, and two of them are part of the Kiowa Island Club, the River Course and Cacique. I worked at the River Course.
I see. Wow, that's intense. And then you had the opportunity to come here to Nashville. You decided to take it. You had mentioned before you're up in is it Gallatin a little bit, and then you had the opportunity
hmm
here at Brentwood Country Club. When it comes to you working with the golfers here, from your experience from when you started, kind of graduating the academy there, working in South Carolina, and then making your way here to Nashville, if you have a coaching philosophy or a way you like to start working on someone who's coming to you with help with his swing, where is it that you like to start, or what is kind of your philosophy when it comes to approaching making changes to someone's golf swing?
So I try to do as much research and get as much background information as I can. I ask a lot of questions. So it's all about, what is your history with the game? What other sports have you played? What are you trying to get out of this? Do you have any physical limitations? What are the strengths of your game? What are the weaknesses of your game? What kind of ball flight do you prefer? Do you want to hit a fade, or you want to hit a cut, or are you just trying to make good ball contact? It's all about basically trying to get them to tell me what they want out of it. And then from there, based on that information, that's where I'll kind of start to pick away certain things that would get the result that they desire.
Yeah, no doubt. Is there a shot shape that you tend to, if someone isn't sure or they're not sure if their preference or what they're going for, is there something that you tend to encourage in terms of a cut or a fade?
So, everybody would love to hit a draw.
Draw.
Not everybody can. A draw, of course, is going to get a little bit more distance out of it, a little bit more roll. But the fade is a lot easier to control. And so a lot of students of mine will come to with something already kind of built into them. They already hit a fade or they already hit a draw. And it's either, do we want to try to change that altogether, or do we want to just hone in on what that you're already good at and try to, make that your own?
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Do you notice, you had mentioned in your background, you asked about sports they've played before. Do you notice that there's a sport that pops up as being a kind of a troublemaker for people's swings, that there's a consistency between playing the sport and having a sort of swing characteristic or a shot shape that isn't necessarily desirable?
Baseball players are always the toughest.
Yeah.
So, I always, uh, I'll try to get people to understand the difference between baseball players and hockey players. So the reason that hockey players make such good golfers and why baseball players usually make not so good golfers is because the hockey player has grown up with that added lever at the end of their stick. And that's what they use to control the puck. The baseball bat, it's just one lever. So the baseball player likes to swing the golf club like it's a baseball bat, and they're only swinging the shaft. They don't really have a concept of what that thing at the end of their stick actually is doing. The hockey player understands that. The hockey player knows that if they try to hit the high left corner of the goal, or the high right corner, or low, like they know what to do with their hands in order to get the flight of the puck that they're looking for. The baseball player, he's really just going to try to rear back hit it as hard as he possibly can. And, there's some things that you can do in a baseball swing that can give you more power. But if you try to do that with a golf club, you could actually be taking power away.
I see. Do you notice anything with the baseball players, hockey players, and golfers translating at their hips? Are you noticing any sequencing or changes where maybe a baseball player, they're doing something a little bit different with their hips that is also affecting what's happening at impact?
Yeah, 100%. The baseball player is going to absolutely rip those hips through at impact and probably going to outrace the club head. The hockey player is able to kind of more shift the hips into it, and so the baseball player, yeah, he's already spinning out of the shot before he's even made it down in impact. So yeah, that's usually what I'll see with the baseball players is the body usually outraces the hands, and that's why for a right-handed player, that's why the ball usually goes off to the right.
Yeah, I can identify with that. I played both, played hockey and baseball, but for some reason, unfortunately, my swing tries to revert back to kind of baseball instincts with the swing. So that's definitely for me. Hips are way ahead, ahead of the game. So pulling that back, and that's something that I actually working with patients beyond opening up certain mobility wherever it might be. A lot of times it is that hip, especially the internal rotation on that lead side leg when we're coming down. Besides opening up that mobility or getting some strength into there, or teaching them how to create vertical force as much as rotational force, but also how to be strong into that hip, how to use that hip without, say, sliding or swaying, but also without getting too happy at the hips, right? When you open up mobility, I've had golfers come back after their eval and kind of mentioned, "Oh, doc, I definitely absolutely know what you're talking about," when we looked at my hip and saw how tight it was. And then a couple weeks later, be like, on the range, I feel so much looser. And I've actually mentioned this in another podcast. And it's like, that's great, but now we need to tighten that up a little bit. So now we need to be strong in that hip. So we did mobility first. Now we need to learn how to be strong in that mobility without being so, you can say, like loosey-goosey, which could create that issue of getting those hips just way out in front now that they have all this mobility and they feel it and they're focused on it so much. But we need to make sure that, again, we always integrate that back into the golf swing as we work through that treatment plan. So that's exactly kind of what I see on my end too, is what you're noticing there at the hips, and then very insightful with the wrists, and noticing that there's an extra lever at the end of that club. That was kind of fascinating. I had never quite gotten that far and made that connection yet, but that is kind of
Hmm.
fascinating. Baseball players, it doesn't necessarily so much what sort of rotation has happened at that hand or that wrist when they're making contact, and surely an MLB swing coach will tell you, no, there's definitely a position we prefer to be in, but for the most part, you can rotate that bat at any length you'd like, and it doesn't matter if you're making full contact with the ball. When it comes to a hockey player, you can't do that, and then certainly the same thing goes with the golf club. So that makes a whole bunch of sense. I found that very interesting. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
Besides,
you take a look at like baseball players. If you really good baseball players, the MLB guys, when they get into impact, for a right-handed hitter, you'll notice that the left elbow is a lot higher than the right.
mm,
And that's because they're trying to hang back and they're trying to launch it and they're trying to get as much power out of it as they can. But, the hockey player and even the good golfer, they come through and those elbows are a lot more level
mhm,
than they are with the baseball swing. And so when you come into a golf swing with that type of position, there's only one way to go. And for the right-handed player, that's usually high and out there to the right.
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. We've seen plenty of that. Um, have you? What is one drill or exercise, or kind of at least maybe thought cue that you're giving baseball players that you're trying to work on from getting so out in front of things to help pull those hips back, to keep them from getting so far out in front?
So one drill that I usually always go to, just to try to keep it simple,
Hmm.
is I'll tee the ball up. We're hitting like a 7 iron. I'll tee the ball up on a really short tee, and then I'll put a second tee in front of that golf ball, and I'll really say, I don't care where this ball goes. I just want you to knock both tees out of the ground.
Interesting.
And so that's really just trying to get an effort of hitting down and into the golf ball. So many people want to try to lift and help the ball into the air. And so I think, especially with like the baseball player who likes to post up and hang back on those on that back foot with the really open hips, uh, you're not really focusing on what's doing the work, and that's the club head making contact with the golf ball. And so in golf, we always want to have club first into the ball and then into the ground. If you watch all the greatest players, the divot always occurs in front of the golf ball.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of like my simple go-to. Um, but you asked mainly about the hips. What I would try to do is I would take somebody and put a golf ball for a right-handed player. I would put a golf ball underneath their right shoe,
Mm.
kind of like a baseball pitcher going off of the mound. It's going to be a lot more difficult when you have that kind of your trail foot up off of the ground and still spin out of those hips.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of restricts them a little bit. And it also encourages more of that downward motion of the ball or the club into the ball and then into the turf.
I see. Yeah. Otherwise, they'd almost spin out or kick that ball out from under them, and kind of lose balance there. So that makes a lot
Hmm.
of sense. Have you had any issues, or let's say besides working on ex baseball players specifically, or golfers? Is there one issue coming to you mostly at BCC, or just Nashville golfers in general, that you're seeing as kind of the big issue that you're working on in most golfers?
Yeah, and I think it's natural human instinct to try to lift the ball into the air. And so people try to do that with the golf club. And so what you will mostly see is when the club gets down in the impact, the wrists are flipping upward.
Mm.
And so in order to get really good compaction and good compression into the golf ball, you want to have the hands actually leading the way with the club lagging behind, so that when you come into impact, the hands are actually in front of the club head. And most of the time, what you'll see is the club head actually bypasses the wrists. And that's all in an effort to try to scoop
Sure.
and lift the ball up into the air. And so not only that with the hands, but you also see that with the weight shift, where people will try to lift and try to get it high into the air. And so the more that they do that, the worse things actually can get. So most of the time, somebody, especially a beginner golfer, is going to, let's say they're topping the golf ball. And that's because they're basically swinging up at the ball so much
Yeah.
that they're hitting above the equator, and the club keeps going up, and so the ball keeps rotating down. And so their natural instinct is to try to lift it, and what they actually do is they just create the same thing, but they make it even worse. Just because, yeah, golf is so different. Everything is opposite in golf. You hit down on the ball in order for the ball to go up. You hit up on the ball goes down. And so it goes against all natural instincts. And so that's why golf can be so frustrating at times, especially for the beginner golfer, is that when you want to try to get the ball into the air, you want to try to help it and lift it. And so people do that with their hands, they do that with their body, and really only thing that they're doing is they're making things worse, because they're only going to be putting more of a downward spin on the golf ball in order to try to do that. So that's why I go back to always that tee in front of the golf ball drill. I tell them, don't worry about where this golf ball goes. All I want you to do is knock both tees out of the ground. And usually when they do that and they focus their minds simply on just hitting that second tee in front of the golf ball, the result usually is a pretty good swing, a pretty good shot.
Yeah, fair enough. Interesting stuff. At Brentwood Country Club itself, what does it take to be an accomplished golfer there? I want to kind of hone in directly at BCC, especially with that member coming up, to attack that course. Again, big thing in golf these days is speed and distance, right? How far we can hit it. I think the data certainly supports that as well. But when it comes to BCC specifically, what is one thing that a golfer needs to be locked in at to be especially successful?
Well, so we just renovated the golf course last year, and so the golf course, the layout of it has not really changed, but the biggest facelift has been around the greens themselves and the surroundings. BCC is not a very long golf course. It's only 6,600 yards from the tips, and we were actually able to gain about 150, 200 yards during the renovation. So even after that, we're still only at about 6,700 yards. So it's not a very long golf course. The main defense is that it's pretty narrow. You've got a lot of trouble left and right, but you're usually, if you don't have a good short game, that's where you're going to get into trouble. So the best players at BCC are the ones that have a really good short game. You know, we now have greens that are a little bit raised from what they used to be, with a lot of different options that you can hit around the greens. So, you know, not everybody needs to just pull out their 60-degree wedge and try to hit that spinny shot around the green. It might be better off for you to hit a little 8-iron bump and run or a hybrid bump and run shot. So the people with a lot of imagination around the greens and people that can use different clubs around the greens, those are the ones that are going to be the most successful.
Yeah, that makes for a fun course. Changes things up a little bit. Have you been able to adapt to it well enough here since you've been since the start of the year?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've been one where I've never really been a long player myself throughout my entire career. For me, it's always been the short game that has been the strength of my game. And so I actually feel now that the golf course has been beefed up a little bit, especially around the greens, it actually works a little bit more in my favor. So, you know, I love different types of shots around the greens. I love using imagination. I love using different clubs. And so, yeah, I just get amped up every time I go out there to play now.
Very cool. The greens are doing okay after the install. You've managed to keep the 3 putts to a minimum.
Yeah, and you know, actually, we got our speed back. Typically, after a renovation, you'll see at least a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, where the greens are really firm. Our superintendent, Brad Erickson, and his team have done a tremendous job to kind of reduce that as much as possible. So, you know, we haven't even been open haven't even been open a year yet, and I saw shots from a few golfers the other day with a wedge that can actually sit and spin back a little bit.
Yeah.
After a year-long renovation, that's almost unheard of.
Right.
So, yeah, kudos to those guys on the maintenance team.
Yeah, impressive stuff. Well, happy to hear that. And the guys in a couple weeks will be happy to be able to compete on some greens that will behave for them a little bit. So fair enough. Very
Hmm.
good. A personal question, curious, in your golf history, have you ever dealt with certain injuries, pain that maybe is recurring, certain things that come up from time to time that you've had to deal with on the golf course?
I've been lucky enough. I'm 37 years old now. I haven't really had any real injuries to speak of. For a few years ago, every once in a while, a short little prick would come up in my back, and I don't know where that would come from, but just in the past 3 to 4 years, I've been working a lot on my stretching, and I feel like that has helped out a lot, and I really haven't had any of those happen ever since then. I do a lot of leg stretching, I do a lot of hip stretching, and I feel like the more that I do that, the less likely I'm going to be to get injured. But yeah, knock on wood, I'm 37 years old and haven't had to deal with any real injuries to speak of.
Yeah, when you say back, you're referring to your low back where that little spot comes in.
Lower back, yeah.
Yeah, I mean you
Hmm.
can't avoid it, right? But fantastic that you've avoided anything really limiting. That's that is definitely an outlier. So kudos to you. Yeah, continue staying as mobile as possible. I would recommend. It kind of starts there. That's the base of the pyramid. Just having access to these positions, and then again, you're obviously talented and know enough to know what positions to get into in the golf swing to be as efficient as possible, which is kind of number two. So, well done. I have to ask you, when it comes to just Nashville golf in general, how have you seen things kind of change over the last few years? Is there any trends? Are you excited to see or what you're seeing here in Nashville golf in terms of where things are heading? Have you noticed anything in particular in that regard?
Well, you can definitely tell a big change in the economics of Nashville. I mean, everybody wants to move here.
Hmm.
Um, Brentwood Country Club, especially, and I know almost every country club around town has really benefited from that. And I know that, prior to the big COVID boom, when golf was really the only thing that people had to do, golf was okay, but after COVID, man, it really took off, and everybody wanted to play golf, become a member of a country club, and so Brentwood Country Club has never had a waiting list to get in until after COVID, and I know there's the same thing for a lot of courses around town, even the public courses. They've always been able to stay relatively busy, but now every one of the metro courses pretty much is sold out every day
Yeah.
as long as the weather is nice. It's really great to see.
Yeah, it's definitely busy down here. It is great to see that the clubs are benefiting, the public courses are all benefiting, and then you guys are able to make all those renovations, right? Able to invest that back into the course and everything like that. I think that's happening all around
Yeah,
town.
exactly. I mean, we're not the only ones. I know there's other clubs around town that are doing the same thing, and even some of the metro courses, because of the success that they've had recently, they've started to actually dump some money into renovating some of those courses, which, not every golf course is going to last forever. I mean, it's just like your car. Eventually, you're going to have to get your oil changed. You got to keep maintaining these things, and so over time, yeah, there's going to be, your greens are only going to last 20, 25 years. If you try to go anything over
Yeah,
that, you're going to be fighting them for however long it takes until you decide to do something about it.
sure. Yeah. Is there an issue in the golfers that you're working with in terms of pain, injury, or performance limiters? Is there any trends that you've noticed in that regard? Whether it's like thoracic spine rotation in terms of a mobility limitation, are you noticing hip limitations are the top list for you? Or is it, like we had kind of mentioned earlier, is it mostly low back pain that you're seeing golfers kind of complaining of? Is it shoulder pain, knee pain? What are kind of the big trends in terms of pain, injury, and then just overall performance limiters?
The ones that I see mostly are definitely the lower back,
Yeah.
um, the knees. Um, Not so much the shoulder, but with our crowd at BCC, a lot of times people have shoulder issues not because of golf, but for, let's say you trip and fall or whatever, but it's those shoulder injuries that seem to be the ones that take the longest amount of time for somebody to be able to recover and get back to golf.
Hmm.
But definitely the lower back and the knees are the ones that I see mostly. Um, the other part is when some people get into their workout regimen and they don't stretch, they get really tight. And so sometimes they might actually be, they're getting more fit, but it's actually hurting their golf game because they're not able to actually rotate as well as they
Sure.
should or as well as they used to. And I've seen it plenty of times where people actually get stronger and hit the ball shorter. It's
Sure.
amazing.
Yeah, if they're limiting their runway, right? Hypertrophy or just muscle mass, sometimes improving in that regard, if you're not doing it in the right way or doing it alongside a mobility or golf specific kind of mobility program, is they do in a way become limiters too. So it is important the way you're training for strength, size, and power, and making sure that you're also addressing kind of mobility stuff. We have kind of a solution to that that we're working on. We'll announce that soon, but kind of a fitness, golf specific fitness program, which will address overall mobility for golf as well as creating strength and power, and always kind of integrating that into the golf swing. So kind of that second half of the picture, opposed to where
Mm-hmm.
I work mostly in the rehab, pain and injury, but also performance side. But it's mostly geared towards any mobility limitations, creating strength where strength needs to be created, but again, not an overall fitness program, and then integrating that specifically into the golf swing so that it makes your job a whole lot easier. That when you ask someone to do something, they can actually do that, right, without having to create a compensation elsewhere that maybe no one's noticing. And so visually, the joint is doing the thing you asked it to do, but they've had to kind of compromise at, say, the low back, where they're jacking up into extension or kind of arching that low back to make it look like that shoulder's getting to the position that you want it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of my role, and then to make sure that you get a blank canvas and all the other pros, that you're working with someone who's strong and stable and at certain joints and joint complexes and mobile where they need to be mobile. So in that regard, yeah, the shoulders, that makes sense. Lots of times that's the case where it's such a strange joint where it's designed to be so mobile, but so much force goes through there that there's a lot of different potential for injury. And then in that rehab process, we need to make sure that we're shoring that shoulder joint up into stability, and getting that nice stimulus into those injured tissues that it needs it, but also at the same time maintaining that mobility. So it can be a difficult joint for sure, and especially if it's gone under the knife, which working with the ladies the other weekend before the member guest, there's a lot of knees and a lot of shoulders, a lot of knee replacements
Mm-hmm.
and shoulder surgeries and things like that. So it can be tough. Well, you had mentioned low back and knees, and I talk a lot about the hip. So the hip's kind of in between. We're talking about the true hip joint. So where the femur attaches at the pelvis. When we have limitations here and we try to rotate, lots of times those compensations come at the knee and the low back. So it's an asymptomatic joint a lot of time, the hip, but the low back and the knee aren't, and that's because they're taking up so much extra stress, especially rotary stress and tension, and that transverse or kind of rotation plane. And what we find a lot of times, those hips are the major cause, the long-term cause, and that needs to be improved before we can really address performance and pain and that low back and knee. So your what you're identifying definitely makes a lot of sense, and hopefully we can make that job a little bit easier for you going forward.
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Of course. I want to ask you just a couple of quick questions here before we finish up. Golf hero growing up, you said you started around age 12 and you knew around age 15 this is something you wanted to kind of turn your life into. Was there a certain guy playing, maybe it was Tiger Woods like everyone else, or is there someone else that really inspired you to kind of go this route?
So my stepdad is the one that got me into the game. I definitely got to thank him for introducing me to everything. But yeah, it is without a doubt 100% Tiger Woods.
Very Very good.
that got me amped up about golf. You know, it was the 1997 Masters when I was in fourth grade, where it was really the first golf tournament I had ever watched. And just seeing something like that and the way that he dominated it was so cool. And then from his career then on, just the way that he changed golf so much, it was so much different than what I knew golf was before that. And, you know, he made golf cool again. And so that was my main influence. On top of that, you know, yeah, that's what you see on TV, but you also have to have good people around you. And so the course where I grew up playing really kind of took me in and welcomed me into playing in their weekly games, their Friday games, their Saturday morning and their Sunday morning games. And so, you know, I would be out there with these 50, 60-year-old guys playing for, you know, $2 a hole, this and that. But, you know, it was always friendly competition, but, you know, it was just that group of people that I was able to surround myself with that made me just want to go out to the golf course as much as I possibly could.
Yeah, fair enough. That'll keep you going when you're making a couple extra bucks on the side. I'm sure you did very well there. When it comes to Nashville golf courses, is there certain holes on certain courses that you've identified as some of the hardest holes for you? First at BCC or any of the other great courses here on Nashville, are there certain holes that kind of haunt you that you know are just not playing to your strengths?
Well, I know specifically at BCC, they've got one of the toughest opening holes around town. You know, it's a longer par four, out of bounds left, water on the right, water that crosses over from your second shot onto the green, and a pretty tricky green complex from that. So number one at BCC, number 9 is a new one that had probably the biggest change from the old course to the new renovation. It's now our number 1 handicap hole. Those two are the ones that will typically kind of test me a little bit more than others. If there was another hole around town, boy, that's a good question. I'm a huge fan of Henry Horton. That's down in Chapel Hill. Okay. And I believe it's their 14th hole that is a par 3 that stretches all the way out to 245 yards. So you can imagine playing that one into the wind. You know, I haven't had to hit driver yet, but it's been pretty close.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we're striving to push that off as far as we can, where you're still hitting your 3-iron, your 4-iron to get there and not have to pull out the driver.
That's right.
Just keep you as young as possible. Well, that's very good. I appreciate you hopping on and giving some of those insights. That was really interesting discussion on the baseball players there and the hockey players. I wish that my hockey background would have translated more, but unfortunately I learned baseball first, and I think it's a little bit more ingrained in my pattern. Mm-hmm. So we'll be always fighting that a little bit. But your tips will be very helpful for me. Otherwise, is there anything for you going forward, any projects you're working on or somewhere that people can reach out if they're interested in maybe getting some help from you? Are your lessons exclusive to BCC members?
No. So that's a great thing about my job is that, yeah, we can give lessons to the public as well. So myself, we have a full-time teacher, Andrew Kincaid, along with 2 other golf professionals. So, yeah, absolutely. If you want to take a lesson from quality golf professionals, come on over and see us at Brentwood Country Club. Would certainly be happy to help you out anyway.
Very good. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you or the other pros there? Is there, whether it's an Instagram handle or just the BCC website, what might it be?
So that's one thing that we're actually trying to work on. If there was a project that you talked about, you know, is actually trying to beef up our social media presence at Brentwood Country Club. So, you know, right now, currently, I would say that the best thing to do is to just give us a phone call. 615-373-9922 is the main number to the golf shop. That is the best way to reach out to us right now. We have an app that we use for instruction, but right now that is something that is exclusive to our members at BCC, and so we're looking on a way to try to expand that out a little bit. But yeah, just give us a phone call. That's the best way right now.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have that number in the description there. And if you do ever get that social media up and running, we can have some highlights from the podcast here as some of your early posts there, and you can get that thing off the ground a little bit. But
Awesome.
very good. Glad that there's an avenue for people to reach out and get some good instruction there in BC. It's beautiful, beautiful course. So highly recommend getting out there and doing some golfing and some instruction. So Tommy, once again, thanks for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate you working through all the struggles to get connected here. But otherwise, we'll do this again sometime. I'm looking to find a way to do some podcast on the courses where we can actually maybe hit a couple balls and talk a little golf and go through some things live and it'll be really interesting, I think. So that will get figured out here in the coming months. Thanks for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it, Tommy.
Absolutely, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Of course.